traders, tents, and twilight. How Silk Road caravans slept through the desert between the hooves and the stars. A merchant evening near Dunwangthy Wind has been restless all day, lifting sand into the air in long, whispering sheets. As dusk approaches, the temperature drops sharply. The heat that once shimmered off the camel's flanks now vanishes into the desert's cool breath. You're deep into the Gansu corridor, somewhere between Dunhuang and the Jade Gate Pass. And tonight you will sleep among traders, animals, and dust. You are not alone. There are nearly 30 people in your caravansum from Samarkand. Others pour from the steppes beyond Kashgar, and a handful from the Tang heartlands. Most are merchants like yourself, though a few are monks, porters, and hired guides. Together, you've been walking and riding through the Taklamakan's edge for nearly a week. Nightfall, though cold, brings a curious relief. No more trudging beside stubborn camels. No more bartering with grizzled local tax officials at oasis checkpoints. No more worrying about sand thieves. At least not tonight. The camp is formed in a tight horseshoe, with the largest tent in the center and the pack animals tethered just outside. First, the cooking fire is built small, smoky, and controlled, using pressed dung and scrub willow as fuel. The stew tonight is predictable but comforting. Millet boiled with bits of salted yak and dried cabbage. You eat from a wooden bowl, crouched on a woven reed mat, listening to a merchant from Bukhara tell a familiar joke about a Persian donkey that outsmarted a Han scholar. Laughter helps. Sleep out here does not always come easily. The wind never fully stops, and the sands seem to shift even after the moon rises. Many merchants carry amulets or talismans believed to ward off desert spirits. Small bronze discs etched with protective mantras, or the image of a lion wrapped in cloth and hung over the tent's entrance. You lay out your bedding slowly. First a felt mat, then a thick woolen roll with a stuffed pillow made from camel hair. A fur cloak becomes your blanket. The richer traders have silk linings. Yours is rough wool dyed with madder root. You take off your boots but keep your sash, on both for warmth and as a hiding place for your small coin pouch. Before sleeping, there's one last task: checking the camel bell, tied loosely to your favorite pack animal's harness. The soft jingling lets you know they're still there, still tethered, still yours. Losing a camel at night would be a disaster. The stars here are astonishing, sharp and deep, with no city glow to dull their fire. Most nights you fall asleep looking straight through the tent flap at the sky. The Milky Way stretches across your vision like a river of salt. But tonight, as often happens, you struggle to drift off. The ground is too hard. Your knees ache. The stew was too salty. You listen to the breathing of those around you snoring, murmuring in sleep, the occasional flapping of canvas sand. Find a sort of comfort in the shared fatigue. Everyone here is tired, not just of travel, but of the silence that comes with it. There is no temple out here, no city wall, no bed carved from rosewood. But there are rituals still. Some of the Sogdian traders mumble prayers in a language you don't understand. One Chinese monk recites verses from the Diamond Sutra, slowly and rhythmically, like a lullaby for himself. You light a bit of incenser, crumbling chunk of resin bought weeks ago in Changanand. Wave it toward your sleeping mat. It smells faintly of sandalwood and spices. It is said that travelers who sleep poorly in the desert are being watched by fox spirits, mischievous desert beings who creep through dreams and whisper riddles. Whether you believe this or not, you whisper a brief apology into the wind. Just in case. Tomorrow, the caravan will cross a difficult stretch, loose dunes, and sharp wind. You need rest. Eventually, after shifting several times beneath your cloak, you begin to surrender. And yet, before sleep fully arrives, you hear something. A low, rhythmic hum-like a lullaby, but without melody. It's the old man from Khotan, the weaver, softly chanting a poem. The sky is a bowl, the sand a blanket, and we are the steam that vanishes at dawn. You close your eyes, the wind calms, the camels grunt softly, and finally you sleep. But what of those who journeyed further along the Silk Road past the mountains, through Persia, and into the Empire of Byzantium? How did they sleep on the road? Pillows, perfumes, and Persian inns, rest stops in the Sasanian shadows. Year is somewhere in the late 6th century CE. The Silk Road has not yet fractured under the weight of later invasions, and trade still flows with a steady pulse through a web of empires. You've left behind the Gansu corridor and the rust-colored deserts of Central Asia. Weeks have passed since the dunes of the Taklamakan swallowed your footprints. Now you approach a very different kind of sleep. Your caravan arrives late in the day at a caravanserai stone-walled complex nestled just beyond the Zagros Mountains in the Sasanian heartland. This is no tented desert camp. It is a permanent stop, well known to traders moving westward, who with real walls, thick gates, and rooms arranged around a central courtyard. Outside, the world smells of dust and sweat and horse lather. Inside, the air changes cooler, shaded and faintly perfumed by burnt myrrh and dried citrus peel. You've made good time this week. The camels are not limping. No wheels have splintered. You've avoided the bandits who sometimes haunt the mountain passes, like wolves in human form. More importantly, tonight you will sleep on a mattress. The Sasanians who rule this land from grand cities like Ctesiphon and Istakar have invested in these way stations with an almost architectural elegance. The walls are made of sun-baked mud brick, the doors of olive wood, the rooms small but clean feature, raised platforms for sleeping, covered with padded woolen mats. These are not the feather-filled comforts of imperial China, but to the weary merchant, they are heaven. You share a room with 3 other travelers, a wine merchant from Antioch, a Zoroastrian scribe from Nishapur, and a monk from Kucha who hasn't spoken much since Mosul. You each get a small basin of water for washing and a modest oil lamp. Someone has chalked protective symbols onto the wall-fire altars. Winged suns and a few crude drawings of lions. Dinner is prepared in the central kitchen. Flat bread, a stew of lentils and lamb, a handful of dried dates and fermented goats. Milk in a ceramic cup. It's simple but nourishing. The wine merchant shares a bit of his cargo red and thick with a vinegar bite. By nightfall, the inn is humming quietly. The lamps are extinguished early to preserve oil, and the stone corridors echo with footsteps, whispers, and the rustling of woolen bedding before sleep. You brush sand and dust from your tunic and unroll your modest possessions. A folded sleeping cloak, your money pouch, a waxed leather document case. Tie them close to your waist or tuck them behind your knees, as theft is not unknown in even the most reputable inns. The room is dim. Someone hums a tune, probably the Antioch merchant. The Zoroastrian scribe lies flat on his back, hands folded over his chest, lips moving in silent prayer. He wears a fragrant oil on his forehead, part of his temple's sleep ritual. You've heard, meant to ward off demons who meddle in dreams. It is believed by some Sasanian physicians that sleep is a cosmic dutier moment in which the soul leaves the body and reports to higher realms. Sleep poorly, and you return confused. Sleep well, and the next day follows a divine rhythm. This belief, you are told, is why many travelers here go to bed after reciting not only prayers, but also lists of the day's actions, people met, goods exchange, so the soul may present them cleanly. You try it, whispering the day to yourself. Passed through Sharad Valley, repaired a broken sandal strap, bartered silk for salt fish, gave alms to a blind boy, bought dried quince for your daughter in cash, go then, sleep. But it doesn't arrive easily. You lie awake, listening to the subtle drip of water from a nearby jug, the shifting of someone's weight, the murmured dreams of a foreign tongue. Your mind churns not with anxiety this time, but with curiosity. What comes next? Where will the road lead? Will the Byzantines bargain fairly? Eventually, your mind quiets. In the courtyard, a guard circles with a slow, rhythmic footfall. The night watch's footsteps are like a lullaby. Your breath slows. The smell of myrrh still lingers faintly in the air. And at last, you fall into sleeper long. Dreamless sleep that feels like floating inside the folds of a woolen tapestry. But not all travelers continue west. Some turn north, climbing into the harsh steppes where wooden yurts replace inns, and horses, not camels, carry the load. There, another world of sleep awaits, where cold winds and drum beats shape the rhythm of the night. You've left the great caravan roads now, having made your exchanges in Bukhara and traded bolts of temps, silk for carved amber, fine fur, and fermented mare's milk. But instead of turning back toward the east, you've joined a smaller group of merchants heading north, toward the Kazakh steppe, where trade meets tribe and sleep is not had beneath tiled roofs or within walled inns but beneath the curve. of the sky under the layered hides of a Mongol yurt. Here, the pace is different. Caravans move not in orderly strings, but as flexible pods, families, animals, carts, and guards, all clustered by blood ties and herding traditions. You're an outsider, but welcomed nonetheless. After all, you bring tea bricks, copper needles, tell you how to, and stories, three forms of currency that always have value. Your hosts are a Turkic-speaking pastoral clan, migratory and well-versed in the politics of trade. Their encampment is fluid yurts, reassembled within a day's ride. Corrals built and broken down before the grass wilts under hooves. And here, amidst cold winds and golden grass, you'll spend your next nights, unlike the quiet solitude of the desert camp or the stone shelter of the Persian inns. Sleep here is communal and rhythmic. Inside the yurt, a single central hearth smolders, low and fragrant, fed with dried dung pine twigs, and occasionally a hint of dried herbs, wormwood or thyme, believed to keep spirits and insects at bay. The structure itself is almost a creature, round, low, and breathing with warmth. The felt walls, stretched over a lattice of bent birch wood, insulate better than any sandstone in wind howls outside, but inside the yurt, heat settles into every layer of blanket and cloak. You sleep not alone, but among your hosts for adults, 3 children, and at least 1 snoring dog. You're given a sleeping mat made from braided reeds, and a blanket stuffed with sheep's wool and horsehair, surprisingly soft and musky. A shared bolster pillow runs along one side of the interior wall. You lay side by side, heads pointed outward, feet toward the hearthen, old nomadic layout to balance heat and security. Before bed, there is ritual, not written, not recited, but done. First, the night drink a bowl of arag, fermented mare's milk, served lukewarm, tangy, frothy, faintly intoxicating. You sip it slowly, trying not to wince. The matron of the yurt nods approvingly. Then, the children sing a brief song in a minor key, 3 lines, soft and meandering, about a moon that sits on the hill like a saddle waiting for a rider. It's unclear whether this is lullaby or legend, maybe both. As the fire dims, your host rubs a handful of fat into a cloth and places it over the central roof hole, sealing out wind. The air inside thickens with sleep and smoke and wool. Someone tells a story of a ghost herder with glowing hooves. Someone else yawns. You pull your cloak tighter and try to match the breathing of those around you. Sleep here is not a lonely act. It is absorbed, as if by osmosis, from the others. There's a kind of comfort in the nearness of shared sleep, elbows brushing, snores overlapping, the low grunt of horses outside the yurt as they shift against by the rope line. You don't dream, or if you do, it is only of hooves crunching frost, of distant howls that may be wolves or flutes, and of a road that no longer seems to lead anywhere in particular, but only onward by morning. The wind has changed. The eldest of the herders tosses open the roof vent to let in the blue dawn. The air is sharp, clean, and laced with fire smoke. He nods at you and says something in his own tongue, which your translator later renders as, "It is good to sleep with travelers. They bring dreams that are not our own." And you wonder for a moment what dreams you've carried across deserts, mountains, and steppes. Sleep, it seems, is more than rest. It's a passport stamped by memory, trust, and the sound of distant bells. Besnore scrolls how monks slept in ancient Buddhist monastery stone. Pillows and temple bells. A night in a cave monastery. The year is 432 CE. You are a guest in a remote Buddhist cave monastery, carved into the rock face of a hillside, overlooking the Indus River Valley in what is now northern Pakistan. You've arrived late in the afternoon, after traveling on foot for days through dusty canyons and narrow goat trails. The sun is low, and the sound of a bell-soft, slow, sonorous welcomes you from above. These are the Gondharan monks, heirs to a tradition where silk meets stone and Sanskrit prayers are whispered alongside Hellenistic sculpture. Their monastery isn't a freestanding building, but a complex of man-made cave chambers, cool inside, damp incense-smelling dot. As a lay guest, you are led to a visitor's cellen, austere room carved directly into the sandstone. The floor is bare, except for a thin straw mat, and your only furniture is a raised stone slab, smoothed down by centuries of knees and backs. This is your bed. There is no door, just a linen curtain. You drop your pack. It's light now, mostly offerings, cooked rice, dried apricots, some sandalwood soap and your worn sandals. A young novice monk bows to you, then vanishes down the corridor. You are alone, and it is time to prepare for the night. Here, in the monastery, sleep is not indulgence, it is discipline. Monks sleep little, 4 to 6 hours at most, and always, at the same time, rising before the sun to chant the sutras and sweep the stone corridors. They sleep on the ground, head to the north, feet to the south, lined with the teachings that encourage humility and detachment from bodily comfort. You follow the pattern. Dot as twilight dims, a bell tolls, the Pradosha, the evening meditation. Hour has begun. You walk the corridor toward the assembly hall, where over a dozen monks in faded orange robes sit cross-legged in candlelight. The scent of clarified butter and lotus root soup lingers in the air. You sit near the back, mimicking their stillness. No one speaks. The meditation bell tolls again, and for a long time, how long, you cannot tell. There is only the hush of breath, the creak of linen robes, and the occasional scrape of sandal against stone. Your back aches, your feet tingle, but gradually your breath slows, and the flicker of the lamps seems to match your own pulse. When it ends, you are calm, heavy, ready to sleep back in your stone cell. You lie on your side, right side down, as the monks do, to aid digestion, and open the heart to dreams. Your cloak cushions your head. Your blanket, such as it is a simple woolen shawl. You notice how quiet it is. No crickets here, no footsteps overhead, only the faint drip of condensation from the cave walls and the occasional flutter of a bat in the upper tunnel. There are no candles now, no fire, just your breath, just the stone. And as you begin to drift, your mind touches on something curious. How did these monks decide how much sleep was enough? Did the Buddha ever oversleep? What happened when a novice snored in meditation? Did they dream of forests, poor scrolls, or their past lives? Outside your cell, a bell rings, once softly marking the end of wakefulness. And you wonder, is dreaming considered a spiritual act here, or a distraction from the path? Wind in the sutras, sleeping rituals across the Buddhist world as dawn breaks. You are already half awake, roused not by alarm or summons, but by the distant rhythm of a wooden gong, struck 3 times in slow succession. It vibrates through the stone walls of your sleeping cell, calling the monastery to life, not with urgency, but with deliberate grace. You rise, brush the dust from your cloak, and step into the corridor barefoot. The floor is cold, the air is cold, but it is clean. Pan, still, filled with the scent of yesterday's incense and morning dew. Ahead of you, silhouettes of monks drift in silence, walking in single file toward the courtyard for walking meditationer, slow, looping procession beneath the fig trees, with the sun just beginning to warm the eastern cliff face. The monastery you're visiting is not unique. Across the ancient Buddhist world, from the highlands of Tibet to the jungles of Sri Lanka, sleep was considered part of the moral path, and sleeping arrangements were deeply shaped by climate, custom, and doctrine. In Theravada monasteries of 5th century Sri Lanka, monks often lived in rock shelters or monastic caves called linas, open on one side and shaded by forest. These shelters were minimal, just a stone bed, sometimes sloped to encourage the monk not to linger. It was believed that excessive comfort encouraged spiritual laziness. According to the Vinaya, the monastic code, monks were forbidden to use luxurious bedding or sleep past dawn. In some texts, there are even instructions for building a proper drowsiness platform, low, hard, and angled, just enough to let you rest but not enough to tempt you into indulgence. Farther north, in Chinese Buddhist temples of the Temps dynasty, sleep was integrated into a more structured day. Monks followed a strict timekeeping system, using water clocks and gongs. Their bedding was slightly more forgiving. Rolled reed mats and padded quilts, often shared communally in long dormitories. Still, silence was absolute, and sleeping in the wrong posture on your back, arms sprawled, was considered undisciplined. Monks were trained to sleep on their right side, hand under cheek, in the posture said to be favored by the Buddha at the moment of his passing into parinirvana. There are even stone carvings from Gandhara and Sanchi showing this exact pose, the serene curve of the reclining Buddha, eyes half-lidded, lips neutral, as if sleep itself were the purest form of detachment. In Tibetan monasteries, where the cold could bite through even yak-wool robes, Monks wrapped themselves tightly in felted cloaks and slept in stone dormitories clustered around a central fire. Before bed, they chanted protection, sutras, verses meant to guard the mind from wandering or demonic dreams. They believed dreams could offer signs, but also temptations. Some high-ranking lamas kept dream diaries. Others trained themselves to wake at the moment a dream turned indulgent or strange. You think back to your own sleep the previous night, not quite uncomfortable, but far from luxurious. And yet you woke without grogginess. The stillness of the monastery seems to do something to the body, to flatten out the noise of thought, to make the hours of sleep feel longer than they are. As the sun rises higher, the day unfolds in quiet tasks, copying sutras with squirrel hair brushes, sweeping stone paths with pomfrond brooms, distributing lentil stew in wooden bowls. The monastery breathes as a single organism, but the topic of sleep reemerges in the midday lecture, where an elder monk speaks slowly about the 3 poisons of slumber: restlessness, indulgence, and forgetfulness. He speaks not with scolding, but with gentle amusement, even noting that the Buddha himself once dozed under the wrong tree and woke with mosquito bites that taught him humility. Later that day, as the sun dips and the air cools, you are invited to visit the library cave, a narrow chamber lined with folded cloth manuscripts. One monk shows you an especially old palm leaf text, written in Pali, that catalogues rules for sleep. Some are practical. Do not sleep too near the fire, lest the robe catch. Others are unexpectedly poetic. Sleep as a tree bends with the wind, not as a tree falls. That night in your cell, the experience of rest feels changed. You lie on your mat not out of exhaustion, but intention. You fold your body as taught. You face the north wall and pull your shawl over your shoulders, and before you close your eyes, you recite a verse offered to you earlier that evening by the youngest monk in the kitchen. In waking, I train the hand. In sleep, I train the heart. In silence, I find the breath that does not dream. And you wonder, can sleep be a kind of meditation, a lesson in letting go? Or perhaps, for these monks, sleep is simply one more path through the forest of the self. Dreams beneath the Bodhi tree, sleep as a spiritual practice. The 3rd night of your stay arrives with the grace of ritual. You know the sounds now: the 2nd bell at dusk, the hush of sandals brushing stone, the rustle of robes as monks return. From the courtyard, sleep no longer feels like the interruption of something. It has become part of the rhythm, like the silence between chants or the blank space between lines of calligraphy. That evening, you're invited to a quiet conversation with the abbot, a man with a face like weathered bark and a voice as soft as wind through leaves. He speaks slowly in Pali and translated gently by a novice, and explains that sleep for a monk is not escape, but transition from doing to being, from seeking to stillness. He tells you of Buddhaghosa, the great 5th century scholar monk who categorized dreams into 5 types: those caused by digestion, by memory, by desire, by spirits, and by true insight. But monks, the abbot says with a soft smile, are most often visited by the first three. He also shares a curious anecdote. In some older monasteries in what is now Myanmar, there were monks tasked with observing others as they slept, not to monitor their behavior, but to study posture, breath, and motion, believing the way one slept might reveal deeper flaws in discipline or attachments hidden from waking life. You learn that in some temples, especially during retreat seasons, monks were trained in lucid sleeping away to remain faintly aware as one slipped into sleep, to allow the mind to rest without surrendering completely to it. This practice, once common in tantric schools of Buddhism, was believed to bridge the gap between sleep and meditation. One manuscript from 8th century Dunhuang even outlined a fourfold sleep purification, a process involving visualization, breathwork, pre-sleep prayer, and the recitation of verses invoking the Bodhisattva Samantabhadra, protector of dreams. Though most monks today do not follow the full ritual, elements remain. A soft verse here, a breath-counting method there, and always the belief that how one sleeps can shape how one wakes. Tonight, in your final hours within these cave walls, you prepare your mat with a strange kind of gratitude. You've grown used to the chill of stone beneath you, to the texture of silence, and to the way your thoughts now arrive slower, more like clouds than sparks. As you lie down, you recall one final teaching from that afternoon's discussion in the Scriptoria, the Buddha's last sleep. According to the Mayapurini Binasutta, when the Buddha passed into final nirvana beneath a grove of sal trees, he lay on his right side, one hand beneath his head, the other resting across his chest. He was calm. His last words were not of doctrine, but of encouragement. All compounded things are subject to vanish. Strive with earnestness. You reflect on the idea that even the greatest teacher of awakening went to sleep one final time, not as failure, but as completion. The flickering lamp at the corridor's end finally dims. The cave breathes, and you breathe with it. You wonder, as your own eyes close, what dreams a monk might welcome, and which he might let pass like clouds over the moon. In this place of waking discipline and sleeping awareness, where even a stone bed can be a teacher, perhaps rest itself is a kind of enlightenment quiet, small but deeply human dot outside. Somewhere far below the cliff face, a river flows without end. The spice that built a navy, nutmeg, sleep, and the Dutch East India Company, a ship full of dreams, life aboard a nutmeg trade vessel. 1623, the year is 1623, and you are asleep in a hammock aboard a Dutch East India Company ship bound for the Banda Islands, deep in the Spice Archipelago of Southeast Asia. Or rather, you're trying to sleep. The air is thick with salt and smoke from the galley, and every creak of the hull or shout from the deck above echoes in your skull like bell. But you've made it this far, from Amsterdam to the Cape of Good Hope and beyond, all for a few sacks of something soft and brown, nutmeg, once worth more than gold, sometimes used as a sleep aid, And now the root cause of bitter conflict and vast colonial ambition. The Verenigd Oostendisch Company is not just a trade company, it's practically a sovereign power, with its own warships, governors, and fortified outposts. It was created, in part, to dominate the trade in spices like nutmeg, cloves, and mace products that were believed to cure plague, prevent spoilage, and yes, induce restful sleep. In Europe, nutmeg had become fashionable, not only as a flavoring, but as a remedy for night humors. Wealthy merchants tucked sachets of it beneath their pillows, steeped it in warm milk, or blended it with vinegar and herbs to ease what physicians called melancholic wakefulness. The Dutch knew the sand. They knew that the Banda Islands, a tiny volcanic chain in today's Indonesia, were the only place on Earth where nutmeg trees grew naturally, which is why you, a sailor with modest ambitions and poor sea legs, have ended up in this precarious floating world below deck. You and the other common sailors sleep in swings canvas hammocks strung above crates of gunpowder and salted fish. The rhythm of the ship is constant, the swaying, the thudding of boots, the endless creaking of rigging. You learn to fall asleep, not despite the noise, but with it. On this voyage, sleep is precious and dangerous. You take turns in watch rotations, for hours on, for hours off. In your off hours, if the seas are kind and the officers in a good mood, you might get 2 hours of uninterrupted sleep. Often, it's less. Conditions below deck are uninspiring. Rats skitter past your pillow. The air is thick with human sweat and mildew. Everyone smells faintly of wet wool and moldy biscuits. If someone snores, you kick the bottom of his hammock. If someone thrashes too much, he might be sleeping off an illness which, on this ship, could mean dysentery or worse. Still, you find ways to sleep. You chew dried orange peel to calm your stomach. You tuck a bit of nutmeg, stolen from a spice, crate into a cloth scrap near your head, hoping it might lull you into a gentler dream. You tell yourself stories about arriving lush green trees heavy with fruit, native Banda people smiling though you've heard rumors that peace has long since broken, and a breeze so warm and even that you'll finally sleep a full night, without interruption. Above deck, the officers and merchants sleep in narrow bunks, their sheets sometimes perfumed with spice sachet. They carry nutmeg not just as cargo, but as comfort, believing it might preserve their youth or protect against the nightmares of a long voyage. The irony isn't lost on you that this precious brown seed, so rare and calming, is the reason hundreds of ships like yours crisscross the globe, their crews sleepless, their holds crowded, and their destinations often deadly. As you roll in your hammock, eyelids heavy and stomach empty, you wonder, how did something so small become worth so much? And how many sailors before you dreamed of peace, only to find themselves wide awake in an empire built on spice? Tomorrow you will glimpse land the low green of Banda Bessa, shimmering in the heat. But tonight the ocean rocks you gently, and somewhere in the sealed cabin of a merchant above, a silver spoon stirs warm milk and nutmeg before bed. a quiet island full of trees, Banda Besser, and the war for sleep the next morning. The mists peel away like gauze, and the volcanic silhouettes of the Banda Islands rise from the sea. The tallest among them, Gunning, API Fire Mountain, smokes quietly as if it too has just woken from a deep sleep. Your ship anchors off Banda Besser, the largest of the nutmeg-growing islands, where the sleepy green canopy hides more than just trees. Stepping ashore feels like stepping into a spice dream. The air is thick with humidity, but richer, too fragrant, with nutmeg, clove, and sea salt. From the trees hang fruit like golden plums. Split them open, and you find the nutmeg seed wrapped in a web of red mace. The two spices born from one pod. But this is not paradise. Not anymore. For nearly 2 decades now, the Dutch have waged a quiet war for control of this island chain. The English, Portuguese, and local Bandanese leaders have all staked claims or made alliances. But the Dutch East India Company, with its charter from the States General and an insatiable European demand for sleep remedies, meat preservation, and perfumed goods, has made its intentions brutally clear. You soon learn that this landlesh, sleepy fragrant is also haunted by violence. In 1621, just 2 years before your arrival, the VOC led a massacre of the Bandanese nobility, accusing them of violating trade agreements. Dutch soldiers, backed by Japanese mercenaries, executed dozens of chiefs and enslaved hundreds. They did so in the name of monopoly. After all, if nutmeg eased the nightmares of European nobles, it could just as easily fund fleets, armies, and global power. The irony, again, is sharp. A spice believed to calm the body and soothe the mind had become the cause of sleepless nights for entire cultures. Now, most of the nutmeg is grown on plantations worked by enslaved people, many brought from elsewhere in the archipelago. The groves are quiet, yes, but it's not a natural silence. It's the silence of control. Overseers carry whips. Signs of resistance are punished. And yet the trees continue to flower, fruit, and fall with the seasons. You, a sailor and not a soldier, are tasked with guarding the storehouse. Here, hundreds of burlap sacks are filled with dried nutmeg, inspected for quality, weighed, and sealed for the voyage home. The air is heavy with the scent. Some men swear it makes them drowsy. Others claim it gives them fever dreams. One officer drinks nutmeg wine each night, insisting it keeps his humors in balance. Another fears it causes madness in large doses. Some evenings, you sneak into the upper levels of the warehouse where the scent is strongest and lie down on a stack of sacking. You tell yourself it helps you sleep. It's hard not to feel that contradiction. You're here to acquire something that induces rest in a place that never truly sleeps. Banda Besser is a colony caught in a dreamlike haze, beautiful, fragrant, and tightly controlled. And still, questions churn in your mind, like waves against the reef. Did the people here once use nutmeg in their own sleep rituals? What dreams were lost when the groves were taken? And if nutmeg brings calm, how did it cause so much unrest? That night, as you drift off on your makeshift bedding, the distant boom of Gunung API echoes across the sea. A tremor rolls through the floorboards. The trees outside sway softly in the moonlight. Somewhere in the hills, a grove rustles with wind and memory. The Nutmeg Treaty, a sleepy island traded for Manhattan. The voyage home begins quietly. The ship is now laden with hundreds of sacks of nutmeg, packed tightly into the hold beneath the sailors' hammocks. The air is so saturated with spice that everything smells faintly sweet, even the ropes. Some claim the scent causes strange dreams. Some say it keeps the ship's rats more docile. Others say nothing at all, slipping back into the trance-like rhythms of a long return journey, for hours on watch, for hours below, and sleep wherever it can be found. But the real story is still unfolding far from the decks, while you rock across the Indian Ocean. The VOC's grip on the spice trade continues to tighten, and with it, an extraordinary bargain is being struck. It begins not with nutmeg itself, but with Run, the smallest of the Banda Islands. Incredibly narrow and barely 2 miles long, Run had remained for years. The lone holdout where the English refused to cede control to the Dutch. The trees there, too, grew nutmeg, enough to make it matter for decades. The two European powers traded accusations and volleys across this tropical archipelago, skirmishing in small wars on land and sea, until both grew weary of the effort. In 1667, long after your own voyage, the Dutch and English finally sat down to draft an agreement. The Treaty of Breda was the result. In it, the Dutch formally traded away a little-known territory in the New World, Manhattan Island, in exchange for undisputed rights to Run and the surrounding Banda Islands. The English got a sleepy outpost in North America. The Dutch got a monopoly on nutmeg. At the time, it seemed a fair trade. Manhattan was swampy, underpopulated, and economically unimpressive. Nutmeg, meanwhile, still fetched staggering prices and was believed to ward off plague, preserve meat, and cure insomnia. 1 pound could be sold for more than a month's wages. As your ship nears home, sails fat with wind, decks heavy with cargo, you begin to notice a curious change among the officers. There's talk of promotion, of land grants back in Batavia, of how this voyage's yield might elevate their names. Among the sailors, the talk is simpler: where the next meal will come from, whether the hammocks will ever feel level again, and tell you how to do with the few coins earned from months of salt, sun, and broken sleep. Back in Amsterdam, merchants will hold the spice in vaults like treasure. Physicians will prescribe it by the pinch. Apothecaries will grind it into sleeping potions, and perfumers will blend it into pillow sachets for the anxious elite. A spice that once grew only on distant trees, tended by hands long silenced, will now rest beneath silk sheets and velvet, P-note, and Manhattans. It will become something else entirely. You never return to the Banda Islands. Most sailors don't. but the memory clings to your senses. The scent of nutmeg, the shape of the trees, the uneasy hush beneath the groves. You still tuck a few shavings in your bedroll, not because you believe in their magic, but because the smell reminds you of dreams, the ones you chased and the ones you gave up as you lie awake your first night back on land, surrounded by the silence of a cold northern room. You wonder, was it really nutmeg that made sleep come easier, or simply the rhythm of the sea, the sway of the ship, and the feeling that even in conflict, the world had a kind of order? Outside, the harbor mists settle in, and somewhere across the water, another ship prepares to sail for Banda.